Hello, everyone. My name is Sister Estelle, and on behalf of Paraclete Press, welcome to this retreat hour with Father Ron Rolheiser. We're so grateful to be able to gather with all of you during this time of separation. A recording of today's retreat will be available later on our website to share with anyone who couldn't join us. And we will send you a link so you can get a copy of Father Rolheiser's book, Domestic Monastery, on which this retreat is based. There will be a short Q&A period at the end of the hour, so feel free to post your questions or thoughts through the question and answer button, which is located at the bottom of your screen, and Father will respond as time allows. As you know, today Father will be speaking to us on domestic monastery, finding peace at home. Father Ron is a Catholic priest, an internationally known community builder and speaker, and is among the most popular spiritual writers today. His retreats and workshops have inspired thousands. He is a specialist in the fields of spirituality and systematic theology, and a New York Times bestselling author. In 2005, Father Ron became the president of the Oblate School of Theology in San Antonio, Texas, a position he still maintains to this day. His regular column in the Catholic Herald is featured in newspapers worldwide. He is the author of over 15 published books, including bestsellers such as The Holy Longing and Sacred Fire, also The Passion and the Cross, Wrestling with God, Bruised and Wounded, Struggling to Understand Suicide, and his newest title, Domestic Monastery. Gosh, Father Ron, you are a busy man, and we are so grateful for having you lead this retreat with us today. Thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts.
Okay, well, thank you, Sister Estelle. And my first question, I guess, to everybody, and maybe Estelle, you can answer it. The sound is clear. First question is always about sound. It's good.
Sound looks good, Father.
Okay, thanks.
Sounds good.
Okay, well, I want to welcome everybody back who was here with us on Wednesday, and I want to welcome those of you who are new, who are taking this in for the first time. So this is our second session on domestic monastery. And as I said the first time, it's a very appropriate season for us to do this in, since we are all kind of by this virus. We've kind of been conscripted to our homes and so on, conscripted to our monasteries. You know, we have a joke among the faculty here is we're communicating on Zoom, and everybody says I'm communicating from my bunker. Well, bunker is one image. Maybe it's a good image for us who are celibates, who live in rectories and so on. But I think those of you who live in families, a better image is simply the image from your monastery. In my last presentation, I ended up giving like the concept of domestic monastery, and then I gave 10 principles for from monasticism to turn your house into a monastery. Today, I want to do two things. I want to just review for 2 minutes the concept of domestic monastery. Then I want to give 10 counsels for living monasticism inside the ordinary life of your house. So you'll see my outline there, and I'll switch back and forth from it off and on. Okay. So the 2-minute review, the concept of the domestic monastery. As I said the other day, Saint Benedict, who wrote the rules for monasticism way back in the 5th century, he put it under one or two Latin words, ora et labora. So that the Latin words are pray and labor. And he wrote all these rules, some of which we looked at. Stay inside your cell, let your cell teach you, run your life by the monastic bell. And today I said there's a work of retrieval. I'm one of the people trying to do this, but different spiritual writers who are trying to go in and pull this wisdom out. You know, look at the wisdom that's there, but take it out of the monastery, the classical monastery, and make this apply to family life. And so today I want to say, how does this apply to family life? And if you see there, I say, test the task for today. So I want to begin. Today what I want to do is I want to give, I say, 10 monastic counsels for living monasticism within ordinary life. 10 monastic counsels for living monasticism with an ordinary life. And the first one I say is this, to see, let the flow of family life stretch your heart. Let the flow of family life stretch your heart. And then each time I'm going to give you a little minor key, and that minor key, which I'll make a little bit bigger, is remember the heart swells in different ways. So let the flow of family life stretch your heart. I want to begin with, try to illustrate with one example. On Wednesday during the question period, somebody asked about books you might read and so on. And I suggested one book by Wendy Wright called Sacred Dwelling. Sacred Dwelling by Wendy Wright. Wendy is a spiritual writer who actually teaches part-time on our faculty now, lives in California, but taught for many years at Creighton. But Wendy's a mother of adult children now, but she wrote this book, Sacred Dwelling, which is really a wonderful theology of marriage written by a married person when she was a young mother, and she started writing it. But anyway, I'm going to give you one single incident from there. She tells the story of when she was a young mother and had her first child. And she said, so one night it was a baby girl, and she was doing graduate work at the time. And she got this little girl bathed and then powdered down, and this child is sleeping in a crib, and she's sitting beside the crib, but she's sitting at the table doing some of her book work. And said she looked over at this young baby, her own child, sleeping peacefully, clean, just peaceful sleep of an infant. It's innocent. She says, it just made my heart swell. It just stretched my heart in ways that it hadn't been stretched before, Then she said, now jump 17 years ahead, and the same young girl going through the turmoil of teenage years, who's snuck out of the house, and now she's coming in at 1 o'clock at night, climbing through a window, confronted by her mother, and she tells her mother some language that can't be repeated here, goes to her room and slams the door. And Wendy said, that also stretches your heart. See, family life stretches our heart in different ways. You have the beauty of family moments. You have times of celebration. You have times where love is felt. You have times of, affirmation and where you can be sitting at a family barbecue some night and say, why, this is just wonderful. This is wonderful. And that swells your heart, and that takes you, that does something for you that nothing else can do for you. But at the same time, family life will have other moments of high tension, moments of bitterness, moments, where somebody dies, or something happens. And remember one mother told me the story, says on Mother's Day, no less, she had to go down at 11:30 at night and pick up her son at the police station. He had been arrested for pulling a knife at somebody at a Mac store. She's picking him up, and she's, and he's sitting in the car, pouting and kind of snarly all the way home. And he goes to his room. He says, by the way, Mom, happy Mother's Day. I'm sure it made her day. See, but family life, that's the family life, and life together swells the heart. And it stretches you. It makes you a better loving person. But as I said, the heart swells in very different ways. Now, the second one. And accept the limits within your family situation. Accept the limits within your family situation. Don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. I worked for, when I was teaching in Edmonton, I taught for about 6 years under Holy Cross priest who was the president. He had some wonderful expressions. He was a maritime. He had many expressions. One of his favorite ones would say, well, this person is as weird as a stick with one end. But he had a lot of little aphorisms that made a lot of sense. And one of them said, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. He always challenged our faculty. He said, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. And we experience that in family life, where perfection becomes the enemy of the good. Let me just try to lead into that. We live in a society that has an over-romantic image of marriage. It has an over-romantic image of family life. The over-romantic image of marriage often comes from our sitcoms, which even the tension is not real tension and so on, and everybody's always beautiful, and even when they're not nice, they're still beautiful and so on. And also family life, you can go way back to, today you have programs like Modern Family and so on, but even they're idealized. Even the family has eccentricities, but they're kind of delightful. They're wonderful. They're never ugly. They're never mean, Or, we had, when I grew up with Beaver, whatever was it, Father Knows Best. And then more recently, a Little House on the Prairies and so on. And they gave the impression, or the Brady Bunch, and so many of these family stories and so on. My Three Sons. Those people in those movies, they don't have real faults. They don't have there isn't any real ugly, mean tension. And everything is still romantic, even when it's eccentric. That's not true in family life. In family life, you're going to run into what I call real limits. Not even of the limits that it's bad, but it's limited, And I think as people sometimes get older in their marriages, or once the honeymoon is over, you sometimes just look at the table you're sitting at and say, this is my life. These people are my life. And you can look at it this way. You can say, this is it. I'm stuck with these people. Or you can say, this is wonderful. I have these people, and so on. But see, they're not going to be perfect people. They're going to be people with real flaws. They're going to be people who irritate you and irritate you in all kinds of ways. But they're also going to be major vehicles of grace for you. But we can do violence to our marriages, and violence to our marriage partners, and violence sometimes to our families, simply by unconsciously asking them to be something they can't be. Maybe a little humor here. My mother was a wonderful mom, raised a big family, and she was a very pious woman, had a deep faith. And sometimes when there'd be chaos in the house, and she'd be a little bit unwound, and she'd be angry at us, and she'd say to us, when I was a young girl, I prayed to the Blessed Virgin, said, I wanted to get married and have a family like the Holy Family, and I've got you. Okay. So our house didn't always look like the Holy Family. In its own ways, it was a holy house. And the same with yours. There are things in families that go over top of this, where you have domestic violence and abuse and so on, different forms of abuse, emotional and so on. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about just the normal grind of family life, the ups and downs. So that accept the limits of your family. Then thirdly, let's switch this. See the present period within your family as a deeply privileged time. Notice I put that in quote there. Your present time in family, it's a deeply privileged time within your life. And then the caption is, think about how you will remember these years when you are in assisted living. Just think about how you will remember these years when you are in assisted living. Sometimes when we're just in the grind of life, you're raising a family, you have young kids or whatever, and you have all kinds of responsibilities and so on, mortgages to pay and kids to drive to clubs and work to keep up, and the pressure comes at you all the time and so on. Or you're a young mother home with young kids and their needs are just exhausting you and so on. You can think, God, this is a grind. And we even have words for it, called caught in the rat race, you're on the treadmill. But I will say, when you're going to appreciate those years, when you're in a wheelchair, assisted living, and they're feeding you Jell-O every night, because that's what they do in assisted living, you're going to look back and say, those were the best years of my life. This is a privileged time. When I would suspect most of you watching this, you're in a time of your life where you're not in assisted living. You're not in a senior's home. You have a lot of responsibilities, but you're walking around, you're healthy, you're in charge, you're driving cars, you're in control of your life, and so on. your life is rich beyond measure. It can seem sometimes like it's a rat race and so on, but your life is rich beyond measure. And if you live long enough, someday you'll be looking back and say, that was the best time of my life. I needed to be in that time of my life, and so on. You know, I think Irma Bombay wrote one of the more famous ones where she said, if I had my life to live over again, said, if I had my life to live over again, when I raised my kids and all those years when I was a young mother and I was getting through the grind, she said, this time I would appreciate it. She said, I would simply appreciate being with these young kids, to have this privilege and so on. And I've read so many of these that we can all write our own. But maybe if you write it now, you're still young enough to change some things, to say, if I had to live my life over again, you know, most people would say, you know what I'd do? I'd enjoy it. You know, I've heard professional athletes tell me that, where retired baseball players say, you know, if I had to had a chance to be, and he was a professional baseball player for more than 10 years. He said, you know something, I didn't really enjoy it. I was always worried that I wasn't good enough, or I made one misplay and I shouldn't have done that, and so on. He said, now that it's over, I realize what an incredible privilege that was, you know, to play this game and get paid millions of dollars and, you know, have all these privileges and so on. But that's true of all of our lives. You know, we're living rich lives inside of our families and so on. It's a deeply privileged time in our lives. And as I said, think about how you will remember these years when you are in assisted living. The fourth one, very important. Let ritual sustain both your family life and your prayer. Good intentions cannot sustain your family life, but your family life can sustain your good intentions. Okay. I stole that, or it's a rework of a thing from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, as you know, was a Lutheran priest. And when he had a marriage homily that I often use. So when Bonhoeffer would marry a young couple, he'd always start his homily this way. He'd say, today you're young, you're very much in love, and you think that your love will sustain your marriage, but it can't. He said, but your marriage can sustain your love. What does he mean? Your marriage can sustain your love. Sorry. Meant this, you know, ritual. Ritual is a container. Routine and so on is a container that can sustain us. So let's use the example of prayer first. You know, there's a naivete you sometimes get from spiritual authors who are writing books on their honeymoon, you know, and they're totally unrealistic, and they give you a sense that you should always be excited when you pray. You should always be able to feel this. You should always be able to be in it and so on. That's nonsense. You can't do it, you know. In fact, John of the Cross, the great Carmelite mystic, said, you know what's going to be the single biggest issue you deal with in prayer, long range? He said, is flat out boredom. You know, it's going to be boring. It's going to, you know, that because you can't sustain high energy all the time, but you can sustain that through ritual. So the other thing is, don't pray when you feel like it. Set times to pray and go there even when you don't feel like it. Sometimes you'll feel like it and sometimes you won't feel like it, but you'll always be there. That's also true with family life. Set yourself concrete rituals. We're going to eat together every night for half an hour, whether you feel like it or not. Okay, you don't have to feel like it. You don't have to be there in a good mood. You just have to be there. Some days you'll be in a good mood. Some days you won't be in a good mood. But you'll always be there. And then that takes care of our moods. Imagine a family says, we're only going to eat together on those nights when we feel love for each other and feel like we want to eat together. We wouldn't be eating together very often, or when we have time for it or whatever. No, you set a time. You know, all the great spiritual writers, they're talking about prayer, but it's also true for family life. They're saying ritual, scheduling, and that sustains you, you know. There's going to be seasons in family life when you want to eat together, seasons when you don't want to eat together. seasons when you want to sleep together and seasons when you don't want to sleep together and so on. You can't gear prayer and rhythms and so on according to feeling. You have to do it by ritual. It's a great line from Bonhoeffer where he says, you think your love will sustain your marriage, but it won't. But your marriage can sustain your love. Marriage is a ritual container. The same thing. If you think goodwill will sustain your family life, it won't. But ritual can sustain your goodwill. Now, fifth. Okay. Very important one. This one taken from John of the Cross, where John of the Cross says, know that most times the deeper things are happening under the surface. It's an interesting comment. So, know that most times the deeper things are happening under the surface. And so my little commentary is, don't take advice from people on their honeymoon, and don't envy your sister who's in Alaska. Okay, I'll tie them together. Okay. John of the Cross says, okay, this is predicated if you're in family life or your prayer life and so on, for if you sustain it for any length of time. He said, initially, things happen on the surface, but afterwards, things are going to happen, the deep things will happen under the surface. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Imagine this. And if you're one of my students, you're going to say, my God, he's not going to pull that example out again. They're already tired of it, but it's an important one. Imagine this. Imagine your mother is in a senior's home, and you're the dutiful son or daughter, and you happen to be living close by. So 5 nights a week, after you finish work, you drop around before you go home, you spend an hour with your mother, you have her, get her settled, have her evening meal, get her settled for the evening and so on, and then you go home. I'll ask you this, in the course of a year, how many times, and you're spending 5 hours a week with her, how many times do you think you're going to have an exciting, interesting conversation with your mother at some depth? Once, maybe twice. And the other times you're talking about the weather, you're talking about the local sports team, you're talking about the coronavirus, you're talking about who came home, who didn't come home, the politics and so on. It's all on the surface, Now, compare that to your sister who's living in Alaska. So you have a sister living in Alaska, nice, far away, and she comes home conveniently once a year, and she visits your mother for 2 days. And during the time they're visiting, they're having deep talks, they're crying, they're hugging on to each other. Of course, you want to kill them both, but I'm going to ask you this. Is what's happening with your sister deeper than what's happening with you and your mother? No, it's superficial. If you only see somebody once a year, you're going to have that kind of emotional thing. If you're with somebody every day, day in and day out, it's not there. And the reason it's not there because it's happening under the surface. All the talk about the weather and everything else, it's all hidden in there. And you'll understand in this sense. When your mother dies, you're going to know her 1,000 times more deeply than your sister. And what you had with your mother is 1,000 times deeper than what your sister had from coming home once a year. That's true for prayer. You go to try to pray every day, at a certain point, you're just sitting with your mother. You're going to be bored. You're going to be thinking about the weather. It doesn't matter. You're there. If you only go to chapel once a year, it might be like your sister visiting your mother. You may have tears in your eyes and really think you're feeling God's presence and so on. That's very important. So in family life, you're fighting, you're arguing, you're this, and so on. You're talking about the weather and so on. And it seems like it's not important. No, but the deep things are happening under the surface. It's only important that you're there. Incidentally, those of you who do centering prayer, that's what centering prayer is predicated on. You just go there and you sit. You don't have to do anything. You're just with God. It's like sitting with your mother. And if you fall asleep, that's even better. Somebody once asked Therese of Lisieux, the little flower, they said, is it wrong to fall asleep when you pray? And she said, absolutely not. She said, a little child is equally pleasing to her parents awake or asleep maybe more asleep, you know. Your mother's like, God, she knows you're tired. She's just glad you're sitting there, you know. So I said, so many spiritual books are written by people in first fervor. That's people on their honeymoon. Imagine a couple on their honeymoon who would write the manual on marriage. Well, people who've been married for a while wouldn't take it all that seriously. You know, that's your sister visiting your mother. Now, number 6, know that family and community will save you by bringing you into God's life. Family and community will save you by bringing you into God's life. In my commentaries, know that Jean-Paul Sartre, the great atheist existentialist, was dead wrong, and the other is not hell. So let me start with Sartre. Sartre was an intriguing man altogether, but Sartre used to say, the other is hell. Other people are hell. Okay. Well, you couldn't be more antithetical. You couldn't be more dead wrong than that. You know what hell is? Hell is complete alienation and movement into ourself. The other is salvation. The other is not hell. The other is heaven. Let me try to tease that out. You have that beautiful text in scripture which we over romanticize and consequently don't get its power. And that's in 1 John, that beautiful text we all know off by heart. So in 1 John, let me just stop this for a second. In 1 John, he has that beautiful text where he says, God is love. God is love, and whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in that person. We often read that in marriages and so on. It's beautiful. It's good to be read there. But this is what that text means. The Greek word there is agape. God is agape. But if you want to get some of the sense of the meaning of that text, just substitute this. See, God is love. God is a Trinity. Okay, not just one person. So if you say God is community, God is family, and whoever abides in family abides in God, and God abides in that person. God is community, and whoever abides inside of community abides in God. I use the same homily on Trinity Sunday every year. We have this Sunday we call Trinity Sunday, and you're supposed to reflect and preach, on the Trinity. And I always tell people this. I said, if you want to understand the Trinity today, don't go home and try to work out how 3 can be 1 and 1 can be 3. We say Trinity is one Godhead, 3 in 1. We have different symbols, the shamrock or the triangle. However, I said, don't get into shamrocks and triangles. Yes, don't try to understand the Trinity. First of all, it can't be understood. Incidentally, that's one of the reasons why it's believable. Chesterton, the great apologist, used to say, I'm a Christian. He said, because we start with the doctrine of the Trinity, which is completely incomprehensible. He said, and if somebody had invented a religion, they wouldn't have started that way. He said, if you'd invent a religion, you wouldn't start with somebody that nobody understands. Okay. But I say, don't try to understand the Trinity. Try to experience it. So, you want to understand the Trinity? Go home today, get your family around the table, bring out some bottles of wine and so on, and just let it flow. God is the flow of community and family life. And when that family life flows, the very life of God is flowing through you. Remember back, this is almost 40 years ago now, but I went to a seminar outside of Portland, Oregon. I was staying at the Trappist Monastery at the time. It was a program on Zen meditation and Zazen. And this woman was giving a talk, and she was marvelous. She was saying how she sometimes would spend 4 hours in a day, praying in Zen posture and so on. And she was talking about the experiences she would have with that. So during the question period, I said, look, I'm a Christian. You're a Buddhist. I said, so I don't want to be unfair, but how would you describe what happens to you in those moments of silent prayer, as opposed to you having dinner with your family at Christmas or on Thanksgiving? I said, well, there's no comparison. There's no comparison. I said, what happens with my family is wonderful, but that's secular. I said, well, what happens with me and God, that's deeply spiritual, Well, I'm Christian enough to work for a Buddhist. Say, no. See, God is the flow of life. And God is met alone in our conscience, but God is also met very, very much inside the flow of our lives. And so it's God, Sartre is wrong. Okay. Okay, number 7. Tension will happen. Your task is to absorb it. Whatever tension you don't absorb and transform, you will transmit. You know, I'm still a child of the 70s. Notice at the time we hung all those banners on our walls, you know. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. Tomorrow is the second day of the rest of your life, and all these things. But excuse the crassness of this, but one of them, there was the one I liked the best. They'd hang up a banner that said, "Shit happens." Okay, it happens. Okay, so when we live inside a family life, tension will happen, but our task is to absorb it and to not to retransmit it. Let me try to explain what I mean by that in terms of using the Blessed Virgin Mary as an image. You know, in Scripture, particularly in the Synoptic Gospels, Mary is set up as the prototype of discipleship. And one of the reasons that why she is the prototype of discipleship is that she ponders. Remember, they used that word, and they only use it about her, you know. They said, Mary pondered these things in her heart. And the crowds, notice the crowds don't ponder, the crowds are always amazed. Jesus, and they are amazed. And immediately Jesus says, don't be amazed. Amazement is not a good thing. You need to ponder. Now, we need to take off our Greek software to understand what this means. See, our Western languages and the concepts really come from Greek Rome. And so for us, and we're dualistic. And so for us, when I say the word ponder means to think deep thoughts, you know, to try to sort something through in your mind, you think deep thoughts and so on. You ponder certain things and so on. That's not what it meant for Mary. Mary was a Hebrew. And even though the New Testament is written in Greek, it's Hebrew thought. And in Hebrew, to ponder didn't mean to think deep thoughts. It meant to hold, carry, and transform tension. Mary held the tension and didn't give it back in kind. Let me give you an example of that. In the Gospels, they say, as Jesus was dying, Mary stood under the cross. It's very interesting. Notice she doesn't speak under the cross. She's spoken to, but she doesn't speak. So they said, Mary stood under the cross. Now, what's she doing under the cross? Okay. I mean, obviously, she's her son is doing. You know. Well, she does. Notice she isn't trying to stop the crucifixion, and she isn't protesting the crucifixion, and she's not even protesting her son's innocence. She's not on the cross saying, look, you know, don't get my son mixed up with the other two guys. They're guilty. She's standing in silence. Now, first of all, in Hebrew, to stand is a position of strength. So that, I don't know if you saw the movie Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. It's one of the things he got wonderfully right. He had a very strong Mary, you know, she's standing, so she wasn't in hysterics, you know, she had been collapsed in hysteria or whatever, prostration. No, she stood, she's strong. But what's her silence doing? It's doing this. It's doing the only thing that's possible at that time. Standing in that silence is very important. Mary is saying this, today I can't stop the crucifixion. Nobody can. Remember, Jesus says, sometimes darkness just has its hour. Sometimes darkness has its hour. It says, I can't stop the crucifixion. Nobody can. But I can stop some of the hatred, the bitterness, the jealousy, and the darkness that caused it. How? By absorbing and not giving it back. How different that would have been if Mary had been under the cross in hysterics, screaming, you're all terrible people, you're murderers, you're doing this. She'd have been replicating the very violence that causes the crucifixion and transmitting it back, which is oftentimes what we do. You know, we absorb things and they are unfair. And so we just transmit them back. You don't want to risk an image here. You know, I live now in Texas. And in Texas, we still do capital punishment. So that once a month or whenever down in Huntsville, we execute somebody, you know. And when he's being executed, there are three kinds of people out in the courtyard outside. So you have two kinds who look very different, but they aren't that different. So you have one group of people, they are there to see that justice is done. So they're there to literally almost celebrate the event that justice is being done. And then you have people with protest banners the other way saying, we're just as much killers as he is, and they're looking at each other. But then off in the corner, you have Sister Helen Prejohn, a few Catholic sisters, usually a few women, seminarian, and they're just standing silently with candles. They're not saying anything. That's Mary under the cross. They're saying, today we can't stop this execution. Sometimes darkness just has its hour, but we can stop some of the anger and the bitterness and stuff by absorbing it and not giving it back in kind. So our real task in family life as an adult, kids are meant to be carried. Adults are meant to do the carrying. Our real task in family life is to take in the tension and then not give it back, to absorb it, to transform it. Which leads me exactly to my next point. Download the tension you're carrying, but only at the right places. Download the tension you are carrying, but only at the right places. You know what I just told you in number 7, I said like to absorb tension, that can be dangerous. You know, if you absorb tension, what do you do with your own tension? That can cause cancer, that can cause heart disease, that can cause all kinds of physical and psychological issues and so on. How do you carry tension? Well, I'm going to give you two rules, one from psychology and one from Jesus. The psychology one is in the dark things. Download your tension, but only at the right places. And there the rule is this. You get rid of that tension, but not at the people whom you're carrying it for. So for instance, parents, you are meant to absorb the tension of your kids. Don't give it back to the kids. You know, if you sit them down and say, you know, it's like being your mother or father, you're all a bunch of brats and you do stuff and stuff, all of which is true. That's not the point. You're meant to carry that tension for the kids. Wait till they're in bed, have 2 glasses of wine, and that's when you talk about selling them to a circus, not when they're in the room. Or a priest, you're meant to carry the tension for your parishioners, not to give it back to them in the pulpit on a morning. So we need to carry it, but not give it back to the people we're carrying it for. Incidentally, a footnote there too. Carrying tension, absorbing, that doesn't mean don't absorb abuse. Don't absorb abuse. That's something else. And we've learned as Christians that's not the loving thing to do. Then you're not taking away the sin, you're enabling the sin. So abuse has to be challenged, but you carry the immaturities of the kids and of each other and so on. But then the counsel from Jesus. Jesus says, you know how you don't get rid of your tension? Is, I love this expression, he says, nobody takes my life from me, I give it up freely. So what Jesus is saying there is, you know something? Your family is going to take advantage of you. Your family is not going to be grateful enough. Your family can know this. So he says, give it over before they take it. Say, nobody asks me to do this. I do them of my own. You know, when Jesus comes before Pilate, and Pilate says, I can kill you, or I can set you free. I can take your life. And Jesus says, no, you can't. He said, you can't take from me by conscription, but I've given up freely. I've already given my life over to my Father. He could have told Pilate, you're 1 day late. Yesterday would have meant something, but last night in the garden, I gave my life over to God. So give yourself over freely, and then, you know, you won't feel resentment. You know, I always tell people, tell yourself inside, nobody gives me a shitty job in this family. I take it up freely. You know, nobody takes advantage of me. I give it over freely. Jesus said that's the key. Then number 9, I want to wind this down to give you some time for questions. Celebrate. Give yourself permission to enjoy and scandalize people equally by your capacity to renounce pleasure and your capacity to enjoy pleasure. It's very interesting. And we look at Jesus in the New Testament. Let's just stop the screen for a second. Jesus, and it says, you'll see that Jesus, and we often don't pick this up, but it's really clear, that Jesus scandalized people equally. He scandalized people in his capacity to give up his life. said, renounce yourself, take up your cross. But Jesus also scandalized everybody equally by his capacity to just thoroughly enjoy his life. When they come and said, well, let's take the classical text, and it's in all four Gospels. And it's the text of where this woman comes, and it's different women in different Gospels, and anoints his feet. That text where this woman comes into the house. In one instance, she's a prostitute. In another instance, it's Mary of Bethany and so on. It doesn't matter who the woman is, and she breaks this expensive jar of ointment over his feet. And they said the perfume filled the whole room. Then she began to weep on his feet and dry his feet with her hair. That's pretty lavish, and so on. They said, and then the people shifted in the room. They said, this shouldn't be happening. And Jesus said, yes, it should. And he says, the poor you'll always have with you. You won't always have me. He said, she has anointed me for my impending death. An interesting thing. She's anointed me for my impending death. There's a double meaning. It does mean, I'm going to be dead some years from now or some days from now. This is it's a symbolic anointing, embalming of the body. But more deeply, it means when I come to die, I'm going to be more ready to die because tonight in my life, I'm truly, truly alive. This is the giving and receiving of this. That is the center of life. Incidentally, kind of a little point there where, and we haven't changed. If this woman had gone to Jesus' grave, nobody would have been scandalized. But because she did that when he was alive, we were all scandalized. And that's still true. I always tell people, it's maybe a sad commentator, say, when you're going to get the most flowers and compliments ever is on your funeral. When it doesn't mean anything on a dead, Jesus is saying, put flowers and stuff on alive people's tables, not on dead people's coffins. But it's also a challenge to us. Enjoy your life. Jesus gives us permission to enjoy. The other day I said, Charles Pagey says, when you die, you become before God. God is going to say, où sont les autres? Where are the others? One of our very fine priests just died, Father Bernie, and he used to challenge people. He says, when you come before God, God is going to say, did you enjoy your life? Did you enjoy the life I gave you? The Gospels in Jesus give us permission to enjoy life, to enjoy pleasure. Do this in your families. That's part of the essence of family life. And then lastly, and importantly, is persevere. Give your family the ultimate gift, your fidelity. Stay for a long time. I'll give you the principle in this story. I'll end with the story. The principle is simply this. The ultimate gift we have to give to each other in family, but in community, in the church, is just the gift of our own fidelity. Today, so often we unconsciously blackmail each other by saying, I'll be your friend, I'll be your family member, I'll be a member of the community until I get irritated with you, or until then I'm gonna move away, And so we keep moving away from each other, and but the ultimate gift we have is to tell you, I'm going to be here. I won't always be happy, and you might not always like me, but I'm here, and you can rely on me, you can plan on me. I want to end with a great story. I have an older brother who's a missionary for years up in northern Saskatchewan with the Dene and the Cree Indians. And he tells this story kind of humorously. He said when he first got there, his first year, and he had been a college professor, teacher, and so on. And he went there and he says, he noticed a strange thing that every time he made an appointment with somebody, they broke it. They'd say, well, come to the rectory at 8 o'clock, but they wouldn't show up. Or it's drop at the house at 7 o'clock, he'd drop there, there'd be nobody home. So he went to see one of the elders and he said, what happens? He said, every time I make an appointment, they break it. And the elders just burst out laughing. He said, of course they're going to break it. He said, the last thing they need is a white man running their lives for them. He said, so they're not going to keep that. So my brother said, what do you do? He said, well, don't make an appointment. Just show up. He said, they'll be nice to you. But then he said, this is the deeper point. He says, I'll tell you what you should do. He said, stay here for a long time, and then they'll trust you and keep their appointments. Stay for a long time. He says, right now they're testing you. They are testing to see whether you're a missionary or whether you're a tourist. I said, why should they trust you? You know, you haven't proven anything. They've been betrayed by a lot of people. He said, they're trying to see whether you're a missionary or whether you're a tourist. That's true for our families. Our families are also unconsciously testing us whether we're tourists, whether we're there for when it's to our advantage and we leave. But the gift of our fidelity, there's nothing greater we can give to each other. Jesus says, the one who perseveres to the end will be saved. Notice he doesn't say, whoever is perfect and has no faults and makes it to the end will be saved. The one who perseveres to the end will be saved. So what we owe our family above all, and they owe to us, is the gift of fidelity. So Sister Estelle, I'm going to turn this back over to you. These are my points, and we have, well, a good 10 minutes at least for questions here.
That's great, Father Ron. Thanks so much. We have a lot of good questions coming in. The first one is from Therese, and she's saying, my question is how to integrate work and prayer. For example, is one meant to keep God to the fore in one's thoughts as one, for example, peels potatoes? Or is one to offer up chores, activities to God as one starts? I generally lose all sense of self or of my relationship with God when immersed in activity.
It's a very good question, Teresa. And there isn't one rule, you know, to say it works this way or that way, or even in yourself, you know, on a given day. But I can say this, most times you don't have to consciously be thinking about God. I remember a line I heard once from French-Canadian social worker, Vivienne Lebris, who's a wonderful social worker. And she says, you know, she says, I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic. She says, and what I do, said, I do for Jesus. But she said, sometimes I can go through a whole year working with people and never mention his name. She said, because I think God is mature enough that God doesn't demand to be the center of our conscious attention all the time. No. When you're peeling potatoes, give yourself permission to be watching a sitcom or the side, or to have some music on, or even to be daydreaming and so on. There'll be times when you want to pray and do that. But do set certain times in your day, you know, like more for formal prayer, even if it's just 5 minutes or whatever. But, you know, God doesn't want you to, as you're working, to be always consciously trying to concentrate on something holy.
Great, thank you. And this is from Timothy Mulner. In regards to limits in family life, speak to the praxis of tough love. How do we balance tough love with the ideals of being domestic church, living monastic spirituality?
Okay, thanks, Tim. That's an important question. I kind of touched on a little bit, but maybe didn't go far enough. And that is, you know, to absorb the limits and also absorb each other's immaturities, but not to absorb each other's abuse. See, tough love, and there, you know, we've learned a lot in our time from 12-step programs and things like Al-Anon and so on, who have made a wonderful contribution to spirituality, you know, because before that, sometimes we were too simplistic, where we had this idea that, you know, you do the loving thing by staying and absorbing, you know, a woman in a violent relationship, she stays because she loves her husband. Now we realize that's wrong. That's wrong from lots of points of view, you know. See, by absorbing abuse, then we're enabling the sin. We're enabling it to go on by standing up. So tough love inside a family is that we have to call people, you know. So two things that, you know, not absorb abuse, but also that if you go right back to scripture and the early Christians, they gave each other community means you have permission to challenge each other and be corrective, you know, so that if something's going on, not just abuse, but a certain laziness or a certain something that isn't good, or you know, there's racism at the table, talk or something, that has to be challenged. And, you know, if you're a gentle-hearted person, you know, which is a temperament, then we find it really hard to do that. We say, well, I'll let the person be a racist or whatever. You know, because as soon as you challenge, there's tension. I know I try to avoid tension at all costs, but it's not good. So what's wrong has to be challenged, and what's abusive has to be challenged, you know, and also what's lazy, or sometimes you have to challenge it. You're not just pulling your share, you know, or and these things aren't abstract. You know, I live with two wonderful, wonderful priests, but sometimes I come in and look at the kitchen sink and say, I want to move out. I want to move out. So I'm finding it a pretty challenge. Thanks.
Great.
Good question.
This is a question from Audrey. What inspired you to write the book, Domestic Monastery?
Well, the two things. What inspired the thoughts and what inspired me to write the book? No, what inspired the thoughts was reading David Steindelrast and Teaching John of the Cross. You know, I just thought, this is so rich, it needs to be put out there. What inspired me to write the book was your publisher at Paraclete Press, who came and said, you need to put this together in a book. So that was much more practical.
We're glad you did.
But you know, it's John Sweeney's keen insight, you know, and he also asked me to do the book on suicide, you know, and just, I've been doing all this writing, and he said, why didn't you put this into a book? But the thoughts themselves were inspired by, you know, teaching John of the Cross for years, monasticism, and then also David Steindelrast kind of pulling this trigger in me saying, these principles should be put out to the monastic bell for everybody.
Great, that's great. Mary Morocco would like to hear more about absorbing the tension of those who are responsible for, but not giving it back to them. This is a really helpful approach, which I'll pick up, but not easy to do. Yeah. And then she does have a follow-up question to that, which I can ask when you're done answering that one, Father.
Well, thanks, Mary. It's you know, sometimes on retreats and stuff, I give a whole hour on this because it's a big question. I guess right now I'll just reiterate the principle, like you need to get rid of the tension, you know, but to not give it back to those you're caring it for. I can give you one other example that I found helpful, and I actually got from Gutierrez, the father of liberation theology, and he says, always do things that to try to keep your heart mellow. He said, and I wrote it up in the Holy Longing, he said that's one of the non-negotiables. So he said, if it means drinking wine, drinking beer, going to movies, doing whatever, drinking with friends and so on, to try to keep your heart mellow so that precisely you can handle tension without immediately giving it back. That you're not under the cross shouting at other people how horrible they are, you know, which defeats the purpose of the crucifixion, you know. So Mary, it's a good question.
She also said, the number 2 question is, the best way to get the Trinity is to gather at the table with food and wine flowing, a wonderful image. I like that too, Father. I wonder about those who just can't get to the table, can't see themselves as welcome, can't accept it's real and so forth. How can we let the wine flow out?
Well, that's a good question. You know, it points to something, really, that is a good question. It points to something I'd see the principles that I'm saying here, they're principles geared to health. You know, we're all relatively healthy. They aren't geared to, sadly, they're not geared to the people who, and people are falling through those cracks. You know, but you know what I'd say to somebody like this though, I'd say, if you don't have a family, I remember one year I was alone on my birthday, and I was preaching a retreat in California, but I was alone. And it was my birthday, so I bought a good cigar, and I got a little bottle of cognac, and I drove out to the nicest beach in California. And I said, I'm going to have a private ritual to celebrate my birthday.
That's great.
So, Mary, private rituals, you know, and then connect yourself in spirit to others as you're doing this.
Great. Thank you, Father. Now we have a question from Dawn, and she says, I'm feeling overwhelmed with 6 kids at home, 3 foster kids and 3 of my own. How much prayer do we make them do together? I try to read with them the daily gospel at breakfast, meal prayers, bedtime prayers. I tried the rosary a few times at night, but they're too distracting, jumping all over, the 3-year-old yelling out, fighting over leading, etc. This is typical in all prayer times. I want them to fall in love with God, but still take it seriously. I think that's a great question that probably so many people here in our audience are wrestling with right now.
Okay, thanks for the question. And again, probably I'm not the privileged one to answer this question. You need a Wendy Wright or another mother or somebody. All I can tell you is that to give yourself permission to that this doesn't have to be perfect. Don't have an over romantic notion of what this should look like. That you have all little cherub people piously kneeling by their beds and praying. That's not going to happen. So, it's like when you take kids to church and they're throwing stuff at each other and so on. They're kids. But again, the only thing I can emphasize, the ritual. Make them do it, no matter what state they're in. If they're fighting with each other, but still remember, let ritual sustain your prayer. So say, we're going to do this every night, and I don't care if you're fighting, or I don't care if you're pouting or whatever. We're still going to do it, and it's not going to be a work of beauty. Accept the limits, and also have a sense of humor about it. Just enjoy it. These are kids, and God knows kids.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. This is a question from Reed Saunders. How do we help family members with their fears? Compassion, of course, but how can we gently redirect them back to faith in God?
Do the first part again. I was just distracted.
Yeah, sure. It's from Reed. How do we help family members with their fears? Compassion, of course, but how can we gently redirect them back to faith in God?
That's a big question and a good one. It's interesting. I don't think sometimes we forget as adults, but as kids, and that's part of it, that there are a lot of fears. Not just spooks under your bed or boogeymen out to get you. There's a lot of religious fears. Like kids are deeply, deeply morally sensitive, and and so there's also sometimes unhealthy fears of God. And if I do this, and how they're going to punish me, and so on. First of all, to accept that it's going to be there. Um, it's amazing, even as a priest, having to work sometimes with young people who are 12 and 13 years old, and young boys are an athlete. Deep down, they have some major religious fears and so on, and kind of moral sensitivities and so on. Um, Gentleness, but try to, I know this is a big agenda, try to give them a God of love, a God of understanding. As a parent, I think that most kids, they unconsciously, if you're a good parent, radiate that, you understand them. You have to give them this sense that God understands, that God is the great sponge absorber of all our immaturities and so on.
Yeah.
But that's a big question. That is really, it's a very important question. And but again, child psychologists and other people could probably speak to that more deeply than I can.
That's great. We have so many great comments coming in here, Father. It's hard to pick the ones to ask you, but I think they're all wonderful. We had somebody say, how do we better improve our prayer life during our self-isolation, especially when we pray our repetitive prayers like Rosary and Chaplets of the Divine Mercy? So how do we better improve our prayer life? This is from Catherine.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. And I'm glad you asked that, and you asked it in the right context, and I'm not even thinking as much of the virus and so on, but, repetitive prayers, the Rosary, the Chaplet of Divine Mercy, or any kind of formative prayers and so on. I want to lead you back to the point where I said, the deeper things are happening under the surface. So, for instance, let me just use an example. When I was a kid, we prayed the family rosary every night. We were a big family. Trust me, this was not always pretty. We were leaning on chairs and you're daydreaming, you're getting through it and so on. But the thing about the deep things happening is we were visiting our mother. You're there. So, like that, like the other question, God isn't asking for our conscious attention. God is asking for our time. God is asking for the effort. And all great spiritual writers, from John of the Cross through all the mystics, they'll say there's only one rule for prayer, and that is show it. Show it. Doesn't matter what. Remember the classic and still one of the best definitions of prayer there is. They say prayer is lifting mind and heart to God. Prayer is lifting mind and heart to God, which means whatever is in your heart and mind at that time. It might be anger, it might be boredom, it might be a sexual thought, it might be whatever, or you want to kill somebody. That's what's in your mind and heart. That's what we lift to God, so that every feeling we have is an apt entry into. But when you're doing prayer for more than 5 minutes, if you're doing a rosary or you're doing something, You can take for granted your mind is going to drift. And that's okay. You know, that's centering prayer. Tell God I'm here to pray. You try to concentrate, but we're human.
Father, I know that you need to run to another meeting, so I think we're going to close by, I just want to read you something from Mario John Paul. He said, "No questions, but grateful for this opportunity to be with Father Ron. Very timely and relevant theme for this challenging times. We are kind of given this opportunity to be in a domestic monastery in a time when we are ordered to stay home or quarantined, even locked down. Love from the Philippines." And I think Mario John Paul speaks on behalf of everybody attending today. So thank you for that, Mario John Paul.
Thanks, Sister Estelle.
You're welcome, Father. And Father, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking from your heart today. Your words will really help deepen our relationship to Christ and to each other, especially in our families. And thank you for giving of yourself in this way. And thank you to everyone who joined with us. I want people to know that Father Rolheiser's books are available from your local booksellers. If they are still open, we really do want you to go and support them. They're also available on his website, which is ronrolheiser.com, and of course from paracletepress.com. Now, the book he spoke to us on today, his writings were taken from Domestic Monastery, which is one of his newest books. And that can be purchased on our website, paracletepress.com, at 20% off today. So it's a great deal. Free shipping is also available this month on orders over $45. So please consider gifting this book to friends and family. It's a wonderful book to recommend for Mother's Day, Father's Day. Your generosity will help support Father Rolheiser and Paraclete Press in our ongoing work and providing free retreats such as this at this time. We really hope you enjoyed this time with Father Rolheiser as much as we did. Our prayers are with all of you for health and safety. And we do hope you'll join us for more of these times together with our authors. Our calendar of upcoming Zoom events is available on our website, www.paracletepress.com. Now, Father, can I ask you to pray for us?
Okay, I'll end with a little blessing. Thanks, Sister. And I also want to thank Sister Estelle, who took the initiative on these things, and of course, John Sweetie and everybody at Paraclete Press. So,
thank you, Father.
So we pray. Lord, we ask your blessing, and today ask a special blessing on all the people who are in their homes, who are locked down and sequestered in our homes. We ask you to bless us with some joy, bless us with less tension, bless us with some fresh air, and bless us with some joy. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Everybody,
thank you.
Have a great weekend, okay?
Yes, thank you, and God bless you all.
Okay, thank you.